Welcome everybody to our third researcher meet for the Animal Behaviour MOOC. We're delighted to have Professor Lee-Alan Dugatkin to join us today in the discussion. And we've got a few students from various places around the world, and I'm looking forward to having a fun discussion about animal behaviour. I wonder whether we could maybe start the hangout by having each of the students just introduce themselves. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about... Welcome everybody to our third researcher meet for the Animal Behaviour MOOC. Your interest in animal behaviour. So maybe you could start, Bella.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Bella Arora. I'm from India and I'm preparing for my graduate studies in behavioral ecology and evolutionary biology. And this is a great platform for me and I'm making use of it as much as possible. Thank you.
And what about you, Kautama? We've lost your audio.
Hello.
Oh, I'm not sure what's happened there. Sorry, we'll just have to skip you and hopefully come back to you when your audio is working again. What about you, Lauren?
Sorry, I was paying attention to the other stuff, so just say what I do.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a small farm in near the Great Lakes in the United States, and I have an equine rehabilitation farm, and we also train people here how to work with their animals and using like new training methods that are hopefully more humane than past ones. So, but I've been involved in veterinary medicine and psychology and animal training most of my life. Fortunately, been blessed that way. So I just want to learn from others.
Terrific. Millie.
Oh, me. Hi, I'm Millie Formby. I'm the teaching assistant on the Animal Behaviour MOOC, and I studied animal behaviour with Ralph in my master's degree, which I just completed recently. So, yeah, I love animals and yeah, birds in particular.
Right. Pratik.
Hello.
Wonderful.
I'm audible, right?
We've got your audio, yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
Can you tell us where you're from and why you're interested in animal behaviour?
So I'm from India and I'm pursuing law here, and I have completed my bachelor's in sociology, and I'm particularly interested in nature versus nurture, or as scholars right now call it, nature via nurture debate, and that's why I'm interested in it.
Okay, thank you, Pratik. Stefano.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Stefano Chin. I'm from Jamaica, and I'm particularly interested in this MOOC because it has some amount of things to it is somewhat relevant to my field of study. I'm currently pursuing my final year in my bachelor's in environmental studies, and as much as it's a wide program actually dealing with different aspects of the environment like climate change and stuff. But I find this MOOC very interesting because I've always had a passion for animals and really wanted to know more about animal behavior, and I think this MOOC really hit the spot when it comes to that.
Great, thanks, Stefano. I'm not able to get any audio, I think, from Emma. Emma, are you able to hear us? No, and what about you, Kautama? Have we got your audio back? Still no luck, I'm afraid. Perhaps what I can suggest is that if you are...
Yay!
Hello. Can you hear me?
Is that Emma that's come back? Yes? Hello?
Yes,
Is that Emma?
can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi.
Hi.
We can't see
Yeah,
you.
I'm just having some technical issues. I will try to fix it soon.
That's okay. Can you tell us where you're from and why you're interested in animal behaviour?
Yes, I'm from Croatia, from Zagreb, and I have been an animal rights activist for the past about 10 years. And I really love animals, and I think that by understanding them more and their behavior, I can do a lot for their just for their rights and to create some better environment for them and to do a lot for, I don't know, for their just for animal rights.
Okay, thank you. Now, Kota, can I suggest, if you want, is that your audio now?
Sorry again?
Yes, wonderful, we can hear you.
Okay, hi everybody, it's been an honor to share this room with you. I'm Cuauhtemoc from Guadalajara, Mexico. I am a math teacher at high school and also a butterfly breeder, and I am a big fan of everything related with ethology.
Brilliant. Okay, if I turn to you now, Lee, I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit about what first spurred your interest in animal behavior and how you came to be involved in the field.
Sure. Well, I mean, now I'm at Professor of Animal Behavior and Evolution for about the last 20 years, but I got interested in a very circuitous, different way. So actually, when I was an undergraduate, I was studying history, and I was particularly interested in aspects of American history. A colleague of mine, a friend of mine at the time, was taking an animal behavior course at Cornell University, which is one of the top programs in the world, and he was just taking a class as an undergraduate, and he sat down with me one night and said, you know, I'm just taking this incredible class, and I think you'd have fun just looking at the book. And like I said, I was a history major. I knew very little about animal behavior, and he handed me John Adcock's Animal Behavior book, which is a classic in the area. I started reading it. I felt like a whole world had opened in front of me that I didn't know about. Just became passionate about learning everything I could on my own, and basically decided that even though I was almost done with my undergraduate degree in something else, this is what I wanted to pursue. So I happened to be lucky. I was at a place that had a wonderful animal behavior and ecology group, and I talked with some of the faculty there, and they told me what they thought I needed to do to get started. I did it, and eventually got into a master's program. Started looking at things like the evolution of cooperation. Continued to be passionate about it, and eventually got my PhD and have been staying in the area of animal behavior and evolution ever since. I mean, in the last few years, I've really had a unique opportunity, which is that I've been able to tie together my two passions. I mean, I've become something of a historian of science, particularly with respect to behavior and evolution, and so I've been sort of able to bring my undergraduate degree in history back and use it to study questions in behavior as well. So that's about 25 years into it.
That's a great summary, and one of the things I was curious about was that you're an author, you've written an influential textbook in animal behavior, which I believe is now in its 3rd edition, a number of popularized books as well. You are clearly very much in demand in terms of the speaking circuit. How do you find time to fit research into that incredibly busy schedule now?
Well, you know, I think that the way that people do research, at least for myself, it changes over time. You know, when I was a graduate student and when I was a postdoc and even early on as an assistant professor, I was doing a lot of the hands-on work. I was doing the experiments either in the laboratory, or I was building mathematical models of evolution and behavior. Now, because of a lot of the things that you've mentioned, much of sort of the hands-on data taking that goes on in my laboratory is often through my graduate students. So, we'll work on projects that we think are cutting edge. We'll set it up together. We'll work out the logistics. But in terms of sort of the everyday data taking, I'm kind of helping them out, but they're doing a lot of it. It's just an issue of there being enough hours in the day, and it's great for the graduate students too. So nowadays, when it comes to the data taking, a lot of it goes through the grad students. When it comes to a different kind of research, the kind of research about, say, building mathematical models or studying some history of science question, I just make time. I mean, it's something I love to do, and the beauty of those things is that you can really do them at any time of the day. So I often tell my graduate students who are interested in animal behavior that, if you have a bend, if you have a leaning towards anything mathematical, the beauty of doing theory in the context of animal behavior is, you could do it at midnight, you could do it at 2 a.m., you could do it early in the morning. It doesn't matter. The same thing holds true for the history of science. And so that allows me a little bit more flexibility to actually be the primary person doing that.
So you sound like you might be somebody who thrives on not very much in a very busy program.
I'm sorry, you didn't hear that.
I was going to say you sound like you might be somebody who thrives on very little sleep. Then.
I like sleeping. It's just a question of sort of managing your time. I really, I love what I do, and so I never sort of think of it as work, and it's just all part of a day. I get a decent amount of sleep, a lot more than I used to when I was a graduate student and a postdoc, but I love it and I'm happy, so no complaints.
Now, I might just open it up to the students, because I'm sure that there are a lot of students that are keen to ask questions. So, look, if you've got a burning question that you want to ask Lee, please go ahead.
Yes, please.
Okay, can I?
Sure, Bella, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, sir. So my question is, can an altruist be completely selfless without no reciprocity at all? Like they don't get the good feeling of doing something good for someone else, or they don't get to die to protect genes of one's own species or relatives or kin. Is it completely selfless altruism?
Right, so that's a great question, and you know what? Maybe just because sometimes I can hear the question, but sometimes it kind of goes in and out. Maybe what I'll do, if it's okay, is kind of repeat the question again, so just in case people will go in and out, they didn't hear it. The question was basically, can an altruist ever be completely selfless? And that is, can it be a case that the altruist just does something to help others, but is not in one way or another paid back for what it does? And it's a great question. This is a question that everybody who studies altruism struggles with. And I'll give you my sense of that, the answer. I think that what animal behaviorists and evolutionary biologists really do is we take the altruism out of altruism. And so the answer to your question is, I would argue, no. They can't be what you're calling completely selfless. What animal behaviorists do is we try and understand the different ways that you may be paid back for being an altruist. So one way, like you asked in your question, was that you do something altruistic and then at some time in the future somebody does something in return for you, and so you're paid back that way. Another classic way that individuals are paid back, in a sense, for being altruistic is through kin interaction. And so there's a gigantic literature on this idea that one way that genes for altruism can spread is that if the altruist preferentially helps its genetic relatives, if you help your brothers and sisters and your cousins and whatever genetic relatives, then what you're doing from an evolutionary perspective is you're helping other individuals who are likely to have the same genes you have, including the genes that are affecting your tendency to be altruistic in the first place. And so you're sort of indirectly getting paid back in the sense that the same genes that are affecting your altruism are being helped in your relatives, because your relatives, by definition, are more likely than strangers to have those genes. The last way, and this is a more controversial way, and I think there are people that would argue with me about whether this is really selfless altruism or not. But the last way that, the last major way that people in animal behavior think about this is the other way that you get paid back is when you're altruistic, even if you don't help your relatives, and even if you don't have somebody turn around and help you later, if you somehow increase the productivity of the group that you're in, then you indirectly benefit yourself. So you may, for example, increase the amount of total food that's coming into your group by being altruistic. And if groups that have lots of altruists, for example, if they are more likely to be the founders of new population, or if groups like that are more likely to outcompete other groups, then there's a kind of indirect benefit that you, the altruist, get. You're helping everybody in your group, and indirectly you get benefits because that group then is able to do other things that groups that don't have lots of altruists can do. That's a much more contentious kind of altruism, but it's worth noting that it is one way that we think altruism could evolve. So it was a great question. There are other ways. But those are the three major ways that we think you get paid back for being an altruist. As far as I know, there are really no good models for the evolution of altruism in which an altruist doesn't get paid back one way or another. It's hard to imagine how that can evolve. I don't know of any such models.
Can I ask a follow-up question then? If I'm allowed to.
Fine with me.
Okay, so hypothetically, if a person commits suicide and it turns out that he or she had asked for donating all of her organs anonymously, so is that altruistic, selfless completely, or again she or he is helping out in the propagation of species somehow?
Let me make sure I got the question because it kind of faded out a little bit. The question was whether or not an act of altruism that helps at the species level can evolve?
Yes. An anonymous organ donor who dies and donates all his organs. So he's not there to feel good about it later on, but still he's helping.
Right.
It is an altruistic act.
Yeah, so I would argue that yes, probably. I mean, so if we're considering a completely hypothetical situation, let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, that we've got an act like that, and that during the person's life he wasn't going around telling everybody he's going to be an organ donor. It was completely anonymous. There were no benefits. Honestly, I would argue evolutionary biologists do not have good models to explain that kind of altruism. I would posit that right now that remains a riddle. There are acts like that. You know, a lot of times when you dig deeper, you find out that that there's something else going on. But in our hypothetical, if there really isn't anything else going on, and a person, well, okay, let me step back. This is a healthy person who could, if they commit suicide when they're healthy, they could do this, they could live on, but they do it to provide benefits to everybody else anonymously. We have no explanation for how that kind of behavior can evolve. I wish we did. It's one of the things that I think we need to work on. There are people who are working sort of at the interface between evolution and animal behavior and anthropology. And these people are trying to bring together sort of anthropology, sociology models of culture with evolutionary models. And in the long run, I think those are the people that are most likely to be able to give us a good answer to the sorts of things that you're talking about. Right now, we don't have a good answer. I would also argue, I'm not convinced yet that we need a good answer, because I'm not convinced yet that the kind of thing that you're talking about is common enough that we really need to explain it. Maybe it is. Maybe there are a lot more of these anonymous folks who are doing good things than I know about. And if there are, then we need an explanation. I'm not convinced that there are yet, but I hope I'm wrong.
I don't think it's common either. It would be trending otherwise.
You don't think, what now?
I don't think this hyper-altruistic suicide plus donating organs is common. It's a hypothetical question.
Right, it is, but I mean, just in general, I think there may be instances, and maybe they're more common than we think, when people truly do things that are altruistic and get absolutely no compensating benefit for it. It doesn't have to be anything as extreme as what you said. I understand that's a hypothetical to get a conversation going. But you know, the same question would arise if certainly people donate significant amounts of money, whatever that might be, depending upon your economic situation. Certainly people donate significant amounts of their income to causes, and there are lots of people who do that anonymously. Yes. The tricky thing, and I guess, Raul, you need to tell me when I'm going on too long with one question, because I can go on forever. So you tell me that we need to wrap up a question, because but until you say that, I'll keep going. Okay?
Very happy for you to continue, Lee.
Okay. Okay. So because there's really another interesting issue that this brings up. You know, people who study animal behavior, a lot of us really consider ourselves sort of on the interface of biology and psychology. And one of the things I think that is still a fascinating question that we really just don't know what to do with yet is, let's consider these cases where people give lots of money anonymously, you know, to help people that they don't know, right? And they do it. And when I say lots of money, I mean whatever that might be for your economic situation. You give a significant amount of your money. The thing is that we really don't know how to gauge the kind of benefits that individuals get simply because it makes them feel good to do that. Right? You don't have to tell anybody, but I know I feel good when I do that sort of thing. And I know that, you know, I try not to analyze myself too much, but I know that my serotonin levels are increasing. I know that my oxytocin levels are increasing. I know that increased oxytocin and increased serotonin and decreased stress hormones, all of which are happening because I feel good that I'm a good person, all of those things probably have, you know, over the long run, significant effects on me. Does that count as a benefit? I think so, but I don't really know how to quantify it. One way that we're trying to get at this question is there's this wonderful, fairly new discipline that animal behaviorists are starting to get involved with. It's called neuroeconomics. And what neuroeconomists do is they actually scan people's brains when they're involved in some sort of cooperative or altruistic interaction. So psychologists forever have been doing experiments where people are involved in cooperation and altruism. Thousands, tens of thousands of these experiments have been done in psychology. What neuroeconomists do is that they do these experiments while they're scanning your brain. And they're trying to figure out what areas of the brain become active when you're cooperative. What areas of the brain become active if someone just cheated on you? What areas of the brain become interactive if you have the chance to punish someone who's a cheater? I think in the long run, that's going to give us some clues about how to deal with the emotional benefits that you might get from being altruistic. We're a long way from being able to quantify that, but not only are these experiments going on now in humans, they have been going on for a while in other primates, and I think chimpanzees, bonobos. There was a recent study done on dogs, where they put dogs in these scanners that look at your brain, fMRI, PET scans, and they give the dog some sort of task to do or some sort of social interaction, and they scan the dog's brain, and they're beginning to figure out what's going on inside organisms' brains. And in the long run, that'll help us understand all sorts of things, including altruism and cooperation.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Perhaps I want to add another dimension to what we are talking about right now. I'm from social sciences background. I'm bachelor in sociology. So probably when it comes to humans, there are certain nurture factors which come in, and the nature part is regulated by the nurture part as well. So when it comes to suicide by an individual,
say that last part again. The nature part.
The nature part interacts with the nurture part, and then a particular individual takes its decisions. So in a sense, what's happening is that as far as humans are concerned, because we are conscious being and we can think, and there's this belief system which supports us constantly. For example, there are norms and values in the society, and an individual, the interaction with the society of an individual, and all those interactions. For example, if a person is thinking about committing suicide and at the same time thinking about donating the organs, then probably there is something more to it, something which is not totally explained by the nature debate. And there are elements of nurture which comes in.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. Go on.
And so
I didn't mean to cut you off.
So particularly my question relates to this only because I'm a sociology student, and I'm right now pursuing law. But I'm particularly interested in the nature versus nurture debate, and I am more inclined towards the nature debate because of the very fact that social sciences right now are moving in a direction. For example, they are moving as you know, it's 1858, and there is no origin of species in place. They are totally ignoring the nature debate as far as the academics in India is concerned. All in sociology department, they do not talk about the nature's debate, and if they are professors do not tolerate all such arguments which come from the evolutionary biology or from a nature's debate. The debate, the evolutionary biology or ethologists or animal behaviorists, all those people who are talking about the nature part of the debate, they do not tolerate their stance. So that's the kind of trouble we are in. So sociobiology, when it was introduced by E.O. Wilson, but I don't know why it's politically, I think, not very sustainable. But then again, it explains it all. I mean, the human nature, animal nature, and human nature. When we combine it, it becomes sociobiology, and it explains it all. That's what I think. That's it.
Well, let me tell you, I think there's a lot to what you said, and I interact with people in social sciences often, and I experience the same thing you do. And I want to tell you about some experiments that we've done in my lab that really address this. But at the same time, I also want to say that the problem, to some extent, exists on both ends. I know people who study evolutionary biology who basically think that what you do is poetry. It doesn't count as science, and so they're just as bad. There are people that are just as bad on the other end. But let's forget about the extremes, and let's talk about what we might be able to do as scientists. And especially especially in terms of animal behavior. So I've always been interested myself in this interaction that you're talking about. I tend to not think about it so much in terms of nature versus nurture as much as genetically transmitted information and socially transmitted or culturally transmitted information. And to me, one of the things that's exciting about animal behavior is that over the last 20 years, we've been able to contribute to the sorts of topics you're talking about in humans, but in non-human systems. So, and a lot of this has come from, where you might expect it to come from. And a lot of it comes from 40 and 50-year-long studies of chimpanzees in 6 different populations around the world. And we're certainly learning a lot about the way that genes and culture interact there. In my lab, when I was a PhD student, I became really interested in ways that we could experimentally look at genetic and cultural transmission in a system that's not primates, but in a sense sort of even more removed from humans. So we have been working with, in my lab forever, we've been working with guppies, the tiny little fish that, that are just an inch long, and we know a heck of a lot about guppies because they've been studied like white rats. Behavioral ecology and animal behaviorists have studied guppies forever. So the reason that's relevant to what you're bringing up is, for a very long time, people were studying how guppy females chose their mates. And the way they started was the way that I think most animal behaviorists would start. We wanted to know whether or not the kinds of preferences that females showed, like, for example, for larger males or more colorful males, was there an underlying genetic component to it? More technically, was it a heritable trait? And the answer for a number of traits was yes. Not surprising and interesting. We started asking, okay, is it also possible that culturally transmitted information is important in this system? So, and in terms of how females choose their mates in our little guppy system, what makes the guppies so nice is you can really manipulate the experiment in ways that's hard to do with a chimpanzee, right? With a little guppy, I can do all kinds of interesting manipulations. So what we did was we set up experiments where a female could see another female choose male 1 over male 2. And we did this with a ton of females. And we just said, if everything else is the same, and a female sees another female choose a male, is she more likely to choose that male herself? And the answer was yes. She basically was likely to copy what she saw other females do. That is a simple kind of culture. It's not the kind of complicated cultural rules that we have in humans, but it's a kind of culture. Copying is a kind, imitation is a kind of cultural transmission. It plays a big role in humans, even though we do all sorts of other things. But the neat thing was we then set up an experiment that is almost like what a chemist would do. We set up an experiment that I like to think of as kind of a titration experiment, where you kind of add more and more and more and more until you get some dramatic change. So what we did was we set up this experiment. The genetics end of what we knew in guppies said that in certain populations, if you just give a female a choice, she really, really likes colorful males. Males with lots of orange, in this case. And that has a heritability. That is a genetic preference. So what we do is we set up this little experiment where it's kind of like, do you know about soap operas, these horrible shows that are on in the middle of the day where, where all these terrible dilemmas are happening in people's lives. So we set up a little soap opera for our female guppies. And the soap opera goes like this. You have a very colorful male and you have a very non-colorful male. What you see, though, is another female consistently preferring the more colorful male. Because we set it up that way. We experimentally design it this way. We use little partitions that force that to be true. So you have a bunch of females, and what they're seeing is this. On one side is this very orange male by himself. On the other side is a very non-colorful male with another female apparently preferring him as a mate. What does she do? Well, the genetically transmitted side of things would suggest she should choose the orange male. The culturally transmitted information suggests she should choose the other male because there's another female near him. Well, you run this over and over again, and you get what I think is sort of the most interesting possible outcome. In certain cases, the culturally transmitted information overrides the genetically transmitted information. In other words, they'll go over to a male who's very, very non-colorful if other females prefer him. But if one of the males is dramatically more orange, then they will choose that male even if they see other females choose a male who has no color. So it's kind of like there's this threshold where, on one side of the threshold, the culturally transmitted information pushes you towards a male who others like, even if she's not colorful. And on the other side of the threshold, if that male is just so dramatically colorful, and you have an innate preference for that male, that overrides the social information. And we even followed it up with more complicated things. But I guess my big point here is, for me, that's the way I want to address these things, right? I mean, if you don't, it becomes very, very difficult, right? Because it's hard to convince people on either extreme to change their philosophy. But we hope that data that helps us understand what's going on will be the answer.
So it's never nurture versus nature. It's rather nurture via nature or something of that sort. So it's interaction, and neither of those extreme poles can be, we cannot take a stand that on the extreme poles. It's somewhere in between.
Right. I agree with you, and we need to continue to design experiments to understand that interaction. I think there are a lot of people who agree with that statement that you just said, but that only goes so far. That sort of, yes, we know both are important, but I think we can do a lot more to really understand the interaction as experimentalists. Great question.
Thank you.
Excellent question. All so far.
Professor Lee?
Yes?
Yes, Professor Lee. Based on what you were saying about your experiment that you did with those guppies, I started to wonder though, how do these guppies, do they make these decisions at the moment that they experience these situations, or is it genetically programmed within them to know how to, manipulate this kind of situation versus that kind of situation? Because this experiment with the guppies is kind of similar
this is another
one that I've already seen.
Yes.
Professor Lee?
You tell me when you're ready for me to answer. I don't want to come. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying I had seen a similar experiment where studies were done on specific female spiders who knew that the males secrete secretions that had negative impact on sperms that caused those sperms to not survive and hence favored their sperms more. So I was wondering, just like those guppies and the spider, how do they know when to make these decisions, or is it some genetically programmed information inside of them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me tell. I mean, this is an issue where I think we are really still just right at the point where we're beginning to understand how to even address that question as scientists and as experimentalists in animal behavior. So in the guppy case, just to kind of continue with that, I think it's a general thing, but I'll focus on the guppies just because we talked about them, but I think it's a general question. In the guppy case, we know that the color issue, their preference for more orange, colorful males, there have been the kind of classic genetic experiments that you would do to show that has an underlying genetic component. But the interesting thing that is, we started to think these females, they're also copying each other, okay? And I'm talking about that as cultural transmission. But it may be that the tendency to pay attention to what others do versus not pay attention, that itself could have some underlying genetic component to it. And so we actually ran a little experiment where we took, most of the females copy what other females do, maybe 75% of them, but about 25% of them don't. So we took the females that do copy and we bred them, okay? And then we looked at the behavior of their female offspring. And we took the females that weren't copying and we bred them. And we looked at the behavior of their female offspring. And we found, it was a pilot experiment, and I don't want to put too much weight on our results, but we found evidence that the tendency to copy itself has it's due to underlying genetic variants. It's heritable. So what that really does is it sort of blurs this whole distinction between culturally transmitted things and genetically transmitted things, because what they do by copying is clearly very cultural. They're paying attention to what others do, and they're doing it, and that's a kind of culture. But their tendency to do that is itself partly due to genetic variance. How do they know how to do these things? That's a tough question. It depends on what you mean. I mean, we don't know what's going on inside their brains yet. We do know other things. We know, for example, that you're more likely to do this if you're younger than if you're older. And that makes sense, because when you're younger, paying attention to what other individuals have done, if they've already been through the whole process, makes sense. When you're older, it makes sense sometimes, but not as much as when you're younger. We know that they're more likely to do these kinds of... But we also know that they're more likely to do these kinds of copying behaviors when there are dangers around. So, for example, people have done experiments, and if you put predators in the environment that the guppies are in, when they express any mate choice, and they're much less likely to show any mate preference when there are predators around, but when they do, they really rely heavily on copying one another, because it's a fast thing. You don't have to really evaluate males very much. You simply look and see what others are doing, and that's easy information to get. Sometimes it's bad information, but it's easy information. And so when it's dangerous and you got to spend your time looking for predators, they rely more on the kind of quick information that you can get from copying. Above and beyond that, how they know what to do, we don't know more than that yet.
So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I?
Sure.
So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really like to ask this question. Can I? So I know the meet is going to end. I would really If Stefano, your doubt is clear.
Sure, Bella. Can I just check whether Lauren has a question?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Like to ask?
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, I just unmuted myself. Is the sound okay?
I'll turn it down a little bit. Just a little bit muffled. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, I don't know, this may open up kind of another discussion, but I was reading through one of your blogs that you wrote about the, if I say this right, the animalities as opposed to personalities. And
Right.
I really thought the whole thing was very interesting. And I was wondering first, is that a term that's becoming more common? Like, is that one that you would use with other people that you're talking to, other professionals that you're talking to?
Yes, I mean, it's something that everybody would know what it means. Usually, I would say most of the time people still use personality. Personality research in non-humans is probably a more common term, but animalities is becoming, people are using it more than they used to. And there's a ton more work being done on it than there used to be.
Okay.
And just so people know. Oh, go. No, you can go ahead.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I wondered. I was reading in that blog. I wondered if anybody is studying the differences that they noticed, like you wrote about, I think orangutans in that blog, and how you noticed that there was only basically two types of animalities in the captive ones, and then you talked about people, and I wondered if anybody is looking at animals in the wild or when they're not captive. Is there a much larger variety of animalities or personalities when they're not, captive as opposed to wild? I'm all done.
Well, okay. Certainly, people are looking at this in the wild, and also in situations that are not quite as artificial as zoos. So there's work that's being done in the wild, and there's also a lot of work that's more kind of classic aviary work, where it's not truly wild, but it's not a zoo either. So that it's more like a classic experiment. So if you're interested, I don't remember if I wrote about these animals in that blog. I know the blog you're talking about, but I can't remember if I wrote about the tit birds are the classic example of these kind of personalities in non-humans. And so to answer your question, which is, if I understand, the question is just, are there more personality types when you look in natural populations than when you look at things like the orangutans? To answer that, I think we just need to step back for 1 second, and let me just give the other listeners here a sense of what we mean by animality, because that'll help answer your question. By animalities, and personality in non-humans, what we mean is this notion that there are a suite of traits that animals display in a very consistent way from when they're very young through sort of their entire development. That comes pretty much from personality research in non-humans, that definition. So in humans, the classic kind of personality stuff that people will study is shyness and boldness. And when we talk about, and a lot of the non-human work, the animal work, is also on shyness and boldness. And because of the way we study it, we tend to think about it in terms of that kind of dichotomy. Because what we really do, for example, is we'll look at whether animals are, for example, consistently shy in all sorts of different kinds of interactions. So, for example, are they less likely to go explore a new food resource, right? Are they more likely to stay away from groups? Are they more likely to not be particularly aggressive? Are they not especially flashy and active when they mate? And are there other animals that are the exact opposite, that are risk takers, that go out and explore new arenas and areas, that are very flashy in their behavioral interactions, that are aggressive? And we do it like that because people who study personality from the human end have sort of defined it that way. It is this kind of suite of traits that you can study across all sorts of different venues to see if animals are consistent about the way they behave. So we want to see, are animals particularly shy across all sorts of behavioral venues? Are they particularly bold? I think if you broke it up and you studied it in a different way, you could certainly cut up the pie and come up with many more different types. But because of the way historically this has been studied, we tend to look for these consistencies across many different kinds of behaviors. And so we end up usually with shy, bold, or there are other pairs of words that people use. Proactive versus, I can't think of the contra term for that, but there's lots of other pairs of words, but we tend to think about it like that.
I guess maybe I'll add a little bit to that too, Lauren, because this is one of the areas that we do a little bit of work on. So we're studying personalities in little native Australian birds, fairy wrens. One of the challenges when you're studying personalities is, okay, how are you going to measure them? And as Lee said, there's a framework that's been developed for humans that's more or less been adopted in non-human animal research. You can create a very consistent environment that you measure things in, and that's very useful because, let's say you take a bird, put it into a controlled environment like a testing room, see what it does. You can recapture it at a later stage and check in that very same environment whether it does exactly the same thing. So the controlled captive environment, something like an aviary, is very useful for that purpose. But lots of people have also criticized that approach because they've said, well, what you're doing is something quite artificial, and maybe what you're measuring is not actually the animal's personality as such, but simply its ability to cope with what is essentially a stressful situation. Being in a space or room that it knows nothing about, has never seen before. And yet, those tests do show the same things that you can measure in what you might call personality attributes in the wild, and that is that individuals are very consistent. So a bird that you catch and release into that room that sits in one spot and does very little will typically do something very similar the next time you catch it. And another bird that you release into that room that takes off and starts exploring every nook and cranny straight away will often do very much the same thing the next time it's caught. And I guess for us as behavioral ecologists, that consistency is a puzzle that's really interesting, because there are lots of ecological situations that you can imagine where consistency just doesn't seem like a very good idea, where flexibility might be better. And so one of the puzzles I think that people in this personality field are trying to address is, why is it that you have this notion of personalities or animalities are very consistent patterns within individuals, when really, in some contexts, you might imagine it would pay individuals to be much more flexible about the way they respond to a situation.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I can even... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to ask a question about, I find it really interesting that you've chosen to coin the term animality rather than personality, and I wondered if that was a deliberate move away from anthropomorphism in the field?
By calling them animalities?
Yeah, is it like a deliberate avoidance of anthropomorphism?
Yeah, it was, in some sense, it was a deliberate move away from anthropomorphism, but in this case, I mean, it was even sort of more, I mean, the word person starts the term, and it's not even like it's a general term that we always mean for people, and all of a sudden people are using it for animals. This is one where the word person was part of the actual term. So I thought, well, you know, let's use something. And I don't know. I doubt I'm the first person to use the word animality. I don't know if I am or not, but I doubt it. But it was a move away from anthropomorphism. It was an obvious one, and it was also one where I guess, you know, that was a blog, and the idea there was really to immediately sort of tell people what this is going to be about. And that's a word I think that, you know, when you hear that word, you immediately think personality, and I think, you know, I think it's almost intuitive that this is going to be about personalities in non-humans. And of course, we're animals too, but I don't, you know, I mean, there's only so much you can do with that word. So, but yes, it was an intentional move.
Can I ask one last question, sir?
Sure, go ahead, Bella.
Okay, this is about a cooperative behavior, and how does a helper bird actually know that it would rather go for cooperative breeding instead of raising one of its own? I have a couple of species in my backyard, like laughing dove, red-winged bluebill, house sparrows. I see more than 2 birds, which are all of them are helping in raising one chick. So that's definitely cooperative breeding. I want to know, how does a bird decide that it would not propagate, it would not produce its own offspring, it would help a kin, it would help its relative in bringing up their offsprings?
Well, I mean, again, that's the sort of question that there's answers at lots of different levels, right? I mean, so at the most basic level, when we ask sort of how does the animal decide, I mean, my immediate response would be would be to cast my answer in terms of natural selection. Cooperative breeding under certain ecological circumstances provides animals with a higher net inclusive fitness, so their fitness plus the fitness of their relatives, than other breeding strategies. And so, you know, the notion that in certain ecological circumstances, when, for example, territories are not particularly plentiful, it may be that you know, you respond by turning to cooperative breeding because selection over time has favored that kind of plasticity that Raul was talking about earlier on, right? I mean, animals. There are some animals. I imagine there probably are some bird and fish species that are sort of obligate cooperative breeders. They always breed cooperatively, but in many instances, what we'll see are situations in which you go around and you inspect your environment. You look to see whether or not there are open territories. You look to see whether or not there are older, aggressive birds that are going to be bad news for you. When you sort of take that information in and assess it, again, how we assess it, that's the kind of thing one day we'll figure out, but we still, you know, don't know what's going on in terms of what's going on inside their brains, but they assess it, and we assume that they're showing a kind of flexibility that's been favored by selection over time. Would you agree with that, Raul?
Certainly, Lee. I'm conscious that we've already taken quite a lot of your time, and so we should probably wrap up the discussion soon. But I'm keen to ask Emma, who hasn't had an opportunity to ask a question yet, whether or not she would like to ask a question of you.
Sure.
So, I'm not sure if there's an issue with the microphone, but let me put Emma's question to you, Lee. So Emma's asking, there is an assignment that students are doing as part of this Animal Behaviour MOOC, which we're calling a field notes assignment, and it's really about observing animals in your local environment and asking questions about their behavior. And Emma's question is, can you find out something meaningful about natural behavior if you're observing animals in captivity? For example, if you're observing them in a zoo.
Yes, well, this is a question I think that all animal behaviorists struggle with, and we've struggled with since since Tinbergen and Lorenz and all, and it's a question that generates very heated answers. I think that the best answer is that you can start anywhere and work from there. So certainly the captive environment is different from the natural environment, and that's different from what you might think of as kind of a laboratory environment. But as we've been saying already here, what you do is you don't stop there, right? You can generate your questions and think about your system. You can start off anywhere, and it may be that certain things you see in captive animals might strike you as being something very unique to the captive environment. Okay, well, if that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean it's useless. You might take different paths. You might ask, am I right? And you can go and potentially study that in the laboratory. You can go and potentially study it in the field and see whether or not you're finding the same things. If you are, then that tells you you've got some sort of very general phenomenon going here that's common to all the different kind of environments that you find the animal in. If you find that it isn't something that you see in their natural environments, this is where I think some of the heated debate comes in. I think there are probably animal behaviorists who would tell you they become completely uninterested in that system once that is the case. That if you don't see this in a natural setting, but you see it in a zoo setting, I'm not interested. I don't think that's a good idea personally. I think there are almost always interesting things that can come out of that. You can ask, well, what is it about the environment, that the captive environment they're in, that allows you to see what you're seeing? Let's assume that you see it consistently in animals whenever in their, you see it in not just your animal, but all sorts of other individuals who are in that captive environment. Even if they don't show it in the wild, if you see lots of individuals doing that, then it raises other questions like, what is it about the environment that causes them to do that? And even more importantly, okay, can I now take that and say, all right, well, I don't see them doing this in the equivalent situation in nature, but maybe they do it in some other situation in nature. Maybe I can look for a different stressful kind of environment in which they manifest that in nature. And, all you can do is sort of follow those different paths. Sometimes you'll find that what you were looking at in the zoo is an aberration that's of no value in any sense. But I bet you most of the time it'll lead you down a productive path in one way or another.
Thanks.
Plus, you got to go to the zoo. Yeah.
Can I just wrap things up by maybe asking you a philosophical question to finish up with, and that is, you've been through various editions of your textbook, and I'm wondering, you've seen animal behavior change as a field. Where do you see it going in the next decade? If there's a short answer to that.
Well, there isn't, but I'll give you one anyway. I think that what we're starting to see now are certain systems that people are really being able to dig in really deeply from both the evolutionary natural selection side and the more proximate hormonal, neuronal, developmental side. And it's those systems that I think in the long run are really going to help us understand animal behavior. And I'll give you a very, very quick example, just so the students who are interested in this might know where to go. So two classic examples would be comparing species of voles one of which is monogamous and one of which is polygamous. We now, because of all the wonderful work that's been done, understand not just how natural selection would favor monogamy in certain circumstances and polygamy in other closely related species, but we understand the different hormones that are coming into play in these systems. We understand differences in the way the brains are structured. We understand differences in the way genes are being expressed in the monogamous versus the polygamous, but very closely related species of voles. Another great system for that is honeybees, where we now, more at the genetic level, understand what's going on with thousands of different genes and how they interact, and we also can study all sorts of cool honeybee things from a natural selection evolutionary perspective. I see those kinds of systems in the long run being the ones that are most likely to kind of give us this integrated view of animal behavior that I think we're all interested in.
Lee, you've been extremely generous with your time, and I think it's been a really absorbing discussion that's covered quite a wide range of topics. And I think that the students will have really enjoyed getting your perspective on all of these topics. So I just want to finish off by thanking you very much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Excuse me, Raul.
It was my pleasure.
Raul?
Yes?
Yeah, before you go, I just wanted to take this last opportunity. I just wanted to ask Professor Lee's last question. Could I?
If it's a quick question, go ahead.
And I'll tell you what, is it Stefano? Stefano,
yes,
1 second. You can ask me the question. If I can't answer it quickly, just Google me up and send me an email, and I'll answer you too. But let's see if I can do it quickly.
Okay. I'm doing my field notes study for this MOOC on the Jamaican croaking lizards, and we know they usually feed on small moths and flying insects that are attracted to artificial lighting bulbs that I have in my backyard. But I've been trying to understand why is it that there's a reduction in the amount of moths that are flying around the artificial lights, and I've researched this, and it's, based on my research, it says that no answer has been really provided as to why moths are really attracted to artificial lighting, and I was wondering if you somewhat knew any answer to that question.
I don't, but it is something that I could probably, I probably could find out a little bit for you. So I suggest send me a follow-up email. I will look. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything, but I bet you, if I had a little time, I would come up with something for you. So send me an email, and we'll do it that way.
Okay, could I have your email address, please?
Just Google me up. I'm the only Lee Dugatkin on the planet, I guarantee you.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, on that note, we'll wrap up again. So thanks very much again, Lee.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'll be in touch too, okay? Take care.